So, hello everyone, and welcome to another session for Project Healing Wise. And let me start by introducing myself, your host for today. I am Imelda Almquist, and I'm also the author of this book, Natural Born Shamans, and of all my books, that's probably the most relevant book for the topic we're talking about today. And before I introduce our amazing guest for today, let me just explain what Project Healing Wise is all about. So Project Healing Wise started about a year ago when the world had gone into lockdown. And many people like myself were aware of many children and young people, having lost so many things like going to school and access to friends. And also some children are in very difficult home situations. So there was an awareness of there being a need for spiritual or shamanic outreach work for children. So what I've been doing is I've been running almost monthly sessions where I've had other people on as guests, talking about a special area of experience or expertise. And the previous recordings are all on a closed Facebook group called Healing Wise, and they remain available there. But as that is a closed group, I'm also thinking I'd like to make some of the material available to a larger audience, because I think this is material that I think Rachel agrees with me, we want people to be able to find. So the plan is to put this session on YouTube as well, to make it available to other people. So I think that's enough about me, and that's enough about the project, calling together people who have well-honed spiritual skills and making those skills available. It's currently online, but in the future, hopefully more in person as well, to children all over the world who are, suffering or facing challenging situations. And previous work is also, we've done work for children in refugee camps and children that we cannot get to at all, but still possible, spiritually speaking, to do work on behalf of those children. So, okay, now over to the most important part, and I'll talk later a bit. When Rachel tells us about her life, talk about some case studies I've done with children on the autistic spectrum. So, Rachel, who are you? And can you tell us a bit about yourself?
Okay, well, thank you, Imelda. Well, first of all, I'd like to say I'm a student on Imelda's Seidr course. We're having a bit of a pause at the moment because of lockdown, but we had the first year and we're looking forward to having another one later this year, we hope. But apart from that, I work as an energy healer and a channel. I do a lot of earth healing work. I work very much with our evolutionary process at the moment. I have a podcast called Sacred You, where I do stuff, I interview people. I've interviewed Imelda in the past, work a lot with Mary Magdalene and her daughter, Sarah. And but I'm here today to talk about Benji, our 8-year-old son. He has an autism of diagnosis. We were talking about how to say it, and I just managed to get it round the wrong way. He's got a diagnosis of autism and severe ADHD. And it's not something I've talked about publicly at all. I've been very cautious about going there, but I'm really happy to talk to Imelda today.
Yeah, and also really want to say that it takes real courage to go on camera and talk about these things, because obviously this is your child and this is your personal life. But also, of course, you and I had some dialogue before we made this recording. And as I was saying a moment ago, I think we both agree that it's important. There's material out there also that can be found by parents who maybe currently face such a diagnosis, and what's the journey that unfolds, what are the possibilities open to you, and also like other additional things you can do that you may not hear from the medical or educational professionals. So I think that's going to be the topic of our conversation today. So I commend you for being here. I'm very grateful you're willing to be here. And Benji is just a gorgeous boy. I love following his progress on your Facebook page. So let's start at the beginning. Could you please tell us something about Benji, and also about your journey as parents, you and your husband, in, receiving that diagnosis. And obviously that's a long journey. There's quite a lot involved before you even get to that point. And the journey of like accepting that this really was his diagnosis.
Mm. Well, us moving country also plays a big part in this story, because when Benji was a year and a half, we moved from the UK to Denmark because my husband is Danish. And actually Thomas had already been here for a year before I came over, because I didn't want to come. My eldest son, Joshua, he lives in the UK with his dad, and I did everything I could to stay living very close to them. But in the end, like, reality was my husband, he's a university professor, associate professor, and he couldn't get work in the UK. He did try. He nearly got a job, but he was overqualified. So that's how it goes. So we had to come over, and so obviously that was traumatic for both me and Benji. Benji loved his brother Josh. It was really, really heartbreaking for him. So initially when we came over, Benji did not adapt that easily. He was quite angry and upset a lot of the time, and we put it down to the fact that we'd moved. And he's sort of like, his whole world had suddenly like disappeared. But then it kind of, the problem started because in Denmark, it's a very different culture to the UK around young children. It's very, very normal for young children to start in a vuggestue or børnehave from the age of like 1, because all the mums work. In Denmark, mums and dads, they all work. They tend to do shorter hours than us. They work till about 3 or 4 and then do stuff in the evening, but they all work. So there's no kind of setup, because in the UK there's loads of play groups and stuff like that. In Denmark, no, it's like they're not around. So he couldn't actually stay at home with me because it would just be me and him, which would not be, stimulating for him. So off he went to vuggestue. He picked up Danish within 3 months of being here. He would in 3 months he was speaking it to the same level. But straight away, there was problems. The pedagogue were calling us in for meetings straight away. He wouldn't do what he was told. He wasn't being like the other children. And, to me, a lot of the stuff they were saying, we have very different cultural expectations. The English from the Danish, like, we don't really expect our children to do what they're told when they're 2 years old. We kind of manage them. So all along, I was like, not picking up the signs. I really don't know, but things didn't really become clear until he started school when he was 5, and then it really hit the fan. It really, really hit the fan, because he just was running around the school completely uncontainable, and he was just in such a state of stress. So he managed to teach himself to read by being on the iPad, because in this commune where we live, they give children iPads as soon as they start school. When they're 5, they all get their own iPad, which I was just completely horrified about. But this is what they do here. And so Benji would basically have an adult with him. They had to take him out of the class. He would have an adult with him, and he would basically be on the iPad for his school day, and then he would, come home. He wouldn't eat or drink. They weren't geared up to getting children to eat or drink, because children of 5 are supposed to be able to feed themselves and take adequate water. So he would come home without any like nutrition or hydration. It was so stressful. It was unbelievable. And this went on for about 6 months. The school psychologist had seen him. She suspected he had ADHD, but wasn't really pushing for a diagnosis, because she felt that as soon as he got a diagnosis, his educational needs would not be met, because he was so bright. He's such a bright boy. But we had an incident one weekend where Thomas, my husband, he took Benji off to Copenhagen Zoo because Benji had missed out on a school trip. and this was, I still get upset about it now. They'd all gone to the zoo and they left him behind because they couldn't manage him, because he won't do what he's told. Yeah, so he got left behind, and he loves going to the zoo. So Thomas took him to the zoo at the weekend, and then coming back from on the train, he lost him. Thomas lost him, and because I mean, like, I'm so typically English. It's like, we never take our eyes off our kids. We have them attached on reins, whereas in Denmark they think you only do that to dogs. and children are allowed to walk quite far ahead and things like that, because they don't have the same traffic conditions. You know, they can do that. They can do that here, and their children stay alive. But in Denmark, so Thomas he never watched him that closely, and he was just texting me to say what time they would be back, because they were about to get on the train, and he looked up and Benji had gone. And what had happened was that Benji, distracted, he got on the train with somebody else thinking it was Thomas, and he ended up at Central Station. Thomas phoning up the police and everything, and someone took him to like lost property. And yeah, I know. And I mean, Thomas was just terrified to tell me, because he knew I was going to instantly want to kill him, because he doesn't watch him all the time in the way that I think he should, you know. But anyway, Thomas found him at lost property. But then at that point I said, that's it. He's getting a diagnosis. I don't care about his educational needs. I just want him to stay alive. So we had a meeting. We called a meeting with the school, and I said, I want him to be diagnosed. And I think the school, I can't remember now how it happened, but anyway, they started the diagnosis process, and that took about a year. And that's not unusual. In the UK, I did join some ADHD groups, but to be honest, the people on them were so distressed, and there was just so many awful stories. I couldn't cope. It was like, I needed some, you know, positive sort of messages, and it was just too distressing to sort of read through what was happening with people. But yeah, it took about a year for him to get his diagnosis, and they said, we don't think he has autism. We think he's got severe ADHD. And, you know, that meant that he could like get referred to like a special school and stuff like that, which is what happened. And then that didn't go too well for the first year, because Benji was so traumatized at having been taken out of the school, because even though he hadn't been in the class and everything, he'd still got to play with all the kids at like playtime, and he'd formed some really good, you know, for him, friendships, because he very much like played the Joker and made everybody laugh, and he loved it. He loved having that audience. And then when he got to his special school, there was just him and I think 2 other boys in the class, and they both had autism, and they didn't laugh at his jokes. But he was so traumatized from losing his community. He just basically,
second loss, wasn't it?
Exactly.
He had the loss of coming from the UK to Denmark, which is huge. Then, you know, when you're trying to settle there and like build a life, there is this whole other loss that would also in him activate some of the previous loss, trauma and experience.
Exactly. So it was so heartbreaking for him. So the first year at his special school, he had his own room he would go into, and he just used to go in there on the iPad. And it didn't start off like that. I mean, that's not how the school is set up, but he managed to manipulate the whole system so that is how it went. And they were getting to the point where they said, look, we don't know if we can keep him here. Perhaps he has to, because his special school is like a midway school. There's actually something called a behandlingsskole, which is like a treatment school. And they were saying, we think he's going to have to go there. So, I mean, during all this time, I was not convinced that they got the right diagnosis for him, because although he has got severe ADHD, I mean, especially back in those days, Benji could not get through a meal or get dressed or anything without constant coaching. But I felt he had ODD, which is oppositional defiance disorder, because he won't do anything that he's told, basically. And I asked them to reassess him, and the school psychologist said no. The psychiatrists were like, but in the end, through help of the runes, which we could talk about, we can talk about how that helped through the whole medical system. And I have to say, the psychiatrists were quite helpful. And the problem is with autism is that each child presents so differently. There is no, like, I've just, honestly, I'm a trained psychiatric nurse. I had no idea about any of this. It's been such an education. But anyway, in the end, I said, you have to diagnose him again. You have to, reassess him. And they did. And they found out he's autistic. And things have got a lot easier since then. So, which is, that's been quite a strange experience for me, that actually getting a diagnosis actually helps, because in mental health, usually getting a diagnosis is not necessarily helpful. It's something you're trying to stay away from, but in this kind of area,
I think it can be a very hard topic, and it can be hard for parents to navigate. It's hard anyway to accept, if your child needs to have a diagnosis, there is always that grief work around. I think no parent thinks they're going to have a child and need a diagnosis. In some ways, you have to grieve over. Also, of course, you love your child dearly, but there maybe is also the trajectory there that's not going to happen, and you need to sort of grieve that. But the thing is also, if a child's behavior is quite severe and they do not have a diagnosis, they're not entitled to help. And I think that is the flip side of the story, that the moment you can say he has a diagnosis of autism, that entitles you to more help. Certainly in the Scandinavian countries, and those countries are pretty well organized around things. But it also means that, I guess, in everyday circumstances, we take him to the park and he doesn't behave like a neurotypical child. You could say, he's got autism, so people understand there is something going on. Or how do you see that?
Yeah, but so he didn't actually get that autism diagnosis until last August.
Really?
So it's not even been and he's 8 now. But all the things I was reading, something the other day, all the things they say about, because usually it's picked up quite young, because they do this when they're babies and they do that. He didn't do any of it. I mean, he's fluent in 2 languages. Danish is now his first language, but he was speaking very, very early on. He learned, he taught himself to read at school. And so all of these things they say about slow language development, it certainly didn't apply to him. And also he loves people. He really, although he gets overstimulated by people, which I understand, because so do I. I mean, I think that's it. A lot of the things they said were ADHD and autistic, noise sensitivity. Yes. Hello. To me, if you're a sensitive person, psychically sensitive, then you have all these things anyway. So to me, it was quite normal that he couldn't sleep at the nursery in a room full of 18 children. I'm like, well, of course he can't, it's like, yeah.
So I think you've given a very good description, but there may also be people who kind of watch this wanting to learn more. So for people who are not familiar with ASD, or maybe for families who think maybe this is something we need to have our child assessed for, but for people who've not made the journey yet of learning so much as you have done, what would you say? Or even for the people for whom it's not an issue with their own children, but who want to understand better when they meet children on the autistic spectrum, in the park or in school. So question now, what would you say to them? And also say something about how better comprehension by other people of the issues involved, could that improve your life?
I mean, I think if you are concerned that your child might have ASD, would be to contact a health professional, because the problem is, if you have a child in these circumstances, you're usually so busy trying to deal with the outcome of that, especially if they've suddenly gone to school and it's all just, you don't have time to educate yourself. You don't have time to do anything. You're just trying to like get through the day and keep your family going and your child alive. So it's to reach out, or reach out to one of the support things like the charities that are around, which obviously going to be different from country to country, or reach out to other people. Maybe someone who also has a child, but is basically just reach out somewhere and get some help. Don't try and cope with it on your own.
No.
Yeah.
Okay. And how do you feel like when you're not like in the setting of like Benji's school where he is now, but when you more like you take him to the zoo or you take him to the park and you meet families who have not met Benji before, like do you feel, can you manage that just fine, or do you feel that a higher level of other people informing themselves that would make a difference to your life with Benji? Is that an issue or not?
You mean like telling people about
Say
him?
you take him to the zoo and he behaves a bit, let's say, wilder than a regular 8-year-old, and maybe how people give you looks as parents, like, oh, you haven't got your kid under control, or people will like make comments, or I don't know if they do that, but I've certainly seen it done. So just wondering in terms of like the whole population really educating themselves a little bit more about what goes on for children with ASD, and how the rest of us who maybe do not have ASD or know a lot about it, like how can we meet that with greater sensitivity and understanding?
Yeah, I mean that is a real tricky area, and I've heard other parents like discussing it, like things that I've read and things that I've heard, but I'm not sure there's any easy solution, because to tell somebody your child's got a diagnosis of special needs, you kind of need to have a bit of a relationship with them. It's not something you can just casually like say to someone who's giving you a funny look. It's a vulnerable thing to say to anybody anyway. So like my neighbours, I always tell my neighbours because Benji shouts and he screams, and it really sounds like we're murdering him. And I don't want people to think like that something terrible is going on, and should they call the police, and it's upsetting for people. If I say he's autistic and he's got severe ADHD, they're like, oh, okay, and then they're really sweet and kind and helpful. But people that are in the street or in the shops, I mean, this is one of the things I thought about before Benji got his diagnosis. I remember taking him to, there was like a school holiday event where children could make something or other, and the Comuna had set it up, and I took him along, and he'd been there with school, and he wanted, they had all these boxes like full of like good stuff to make stuff with, and he was pulling out this box of like wooden toys, and he wanted to glue them to his paper. And I'm like, no, Benji, you can't do that, because they have to stay here and be played with. I can. We did it the last time, which I know wasn't true. And I was putting the box away, and he started screaming and kicking me. And this was before he got his diagnosis. And I was just like, I know there was some people there that I knew, like professionally, because I was involved in a healing group there. And I was just like, the English mother in me was just dying of embarrassment, because like in Denmark, no one shouts at their kids. Whereas in the UK, it's like we have this moral obligation to make our children behave. So we make sure everyone can hear us when we say, no, so-and-so, you can't do it. Whereas in Denmark, you never tell your kids off. And I had to, I was really having to. And then I walked out and I said to him, I wish I'd never brought you. And he said, I wish you'd never brought me either. But I think that day, the English mother in me sort of died, that needs to show off to everybody about how good her kids are. Yeah. Because I've just like, I don't care anymore. I know he's going to carry on. And it's like, I've really released that need to sort of be morally morally good at in public. So I guess people have to find their own ways of coping, because that's it. You can't tell from looking at a kid with ASD that they have ASD. I mean, Benji looks completely normal. I mean,
yeah, no, that's the thing, isn't it? I've sometimes heard parents say that it would always have been easier if they had a visible disability, so people see it and they adjust their expectations. Well, now there's always that whole education piece. So yeah, no. Well, we've all been, the pandemic is still going on. The UK is unlocking a bit. I don't know what's happening in Denmark. Things in Sweden are still quite dire. And our family, my husband is Swedish, so we spend a lot of time in Sweden. So how have the pandemic and all these lockdowns affected your family? How has that worked out for you in Denmark?
well, in some ways, I feel it hasn't affected us as much as other people, because after the initial impact, so we shut down really early in Denmark. We shut down like early March, I think it was, and everything just shut down. People were so, again, very different mentality here in Denmark. People were just like, and we all locked ourselves indoors and we didn't go out. And so, Thomas was home. He was in the room behind me teaching his classes online. I was in here where I am doing this. And Benji was in the kitchen, like on his computer, because he had his school computer. And that went on for a couple of weeks. And then it was really, really difficult though. Like managing the three of us at home, I was like, this is not sustainable. We're going to have a breakdown. I'm going to have a breakdown anyway. And I spoke to one of my friends, and she said she'd heard on the news that the school that Benji was at, they actually had to give us like support, which they hadn't mentioned actually. Yeah. So the next day I wrote to the school leader for his department, and I said, we are really struggling. This is not sustainable. What can you offer us? Because they do know Benji is a high maintenance child. They do understand his needs, because even sort of like compared to the other kids at school, he is very, very high maintenance. And so they offered us, I think, 8 hours a week. He went in 4 hours on a Tuesday and 4 hours on a Thursday. And that kept us alive for the next couple of months. And then by this time, they'd sort of got a handle on what was going on, and they opened up the special needs schools again.
Yeah. Okay.
So they went back. And then I just had Thomas at home, and then eventually he also managed, because he's like a public servant, they sort of had like closed like all the universities and everything, but he has a prolapse disc on his back. He has a special desk at work for standing up, and he has his back pain. So he said, I need to go back to work for my desk. And so he got back into his office as well. So that was, I think that happened at the beginning of this year. So I was just like, thank you.
Some space.
So in some way, having these extra problems has made our life easier in that way, because we're an apartment, and I know lots of other people are and have had to live like through the whole thing, and it's really difficult.
Yeah, it is difficult for so many people. Yeah. Okay. Well, we've also promised our audience we'd start talking about the spiritual dimension and spiritual and shamanic practices. So maybe let me ask you first, what brought you to Seidr work and to shamanic practices?
Well, before I answer that, just in case I forget, I did want to make the point that Benji just got his autism diagnosis in August. And we've been in crisis really for about, 2 or 3 years with him. So we're just starting to come out now. So I just feel like I'm starting to get my head around. I'm not presenting myself as an expert at all. I'm just sharing my experience. I certainly don't. Yeah, exactly. I don't have all the answers. I'm not saying I'm some sort of autism spiritual expert or anything like that. Not at all. This is just sort of, what I've noticed along the way, really. But the Seidr. So a few years ago, when I came to Denmark, I had to go to language school because of Brexit. I'm not sure I would have gone otherwise, Imelda, because I'm not like you. I'm not a language lover at all, and you know, I find it really strenuous and feel so self-conscious. I'm a typical Brit, I'm afraid. And but Brexit happened, which meant that I would be a person living in Denmark from outside of the EU, and Denmark have one of the hardest immigration requirements out of all the countries in the world. So I was like, because, you know, what were we going to do if I got deported? So one of the requirements is you have to have a certain language qualification if you want to apply to live here, called the danskprøve. So I had to go, and it was a really academic qualification. So it's sort of quite a high level, but it doesn't really teach you to speak Danish. So I had to study, read and write really well. I had to give a presentation in Danish, but we never spoke in the class really. It was all just passing tests and all the rest of it. But 2.5 years it took me. And luckily at that point they were paying for it, because otherwise it would have cost me quite a lot. So I went to language school and it was so stressful. A lot of the things we were doing were around politics and the state of the world, and I was surrounded by people who were, you know, very interested in business, and all they were traumatized immigrants from, you know, Iraq and places like that. So it was a very difficult setting to sit in every day, like energetically. And then we would get a summer break, and I can remember thinking, right, oh, I had no energy for any spiritual practices or anything. I just used to like get through the day, come home, and then deal with what was going on at home. And then we had this long summer break, and I was like, oh, thank God I can do something spiritual. What can I do? And I had this huge urge come up in me to do something shamanic, which I'd never really done. I mean, I've done loads of training in healing and this and that and the other, never really done anything shamanic. So I thought, okay, I know some people who offer training. Thomas had done some of their stuff in Copenhagen. I'll go and do that. Looked up the courses, they were all fully booked. Oh, all right then. So I went online, doing whatever I was doing that day, and I saw something by Sandra Ingerman. She was doing, you know, she's just does so many teaching things and courses. She was teaching this shamanic working in your community. I was like, oh, that sounds great, I'll do that. So I did that. It was great. I used to go and listen to the journeys out. I used to go and walk along the fjord and then find somewhere to lie on the ground and listen to these journeys, so that I was outside next to the water with fresh air and not in a house or a classroom, you know. And then I heard you talking on there, Imelda, about your work with children. I was like, oh wow, this is great, I love this. And I looked up your website, and then I saw you were teaching in Sweden, and then I saw, because that was the introduction course in Skåne, and it's just like literally like an hour and a half away from where I live, and I was like, oh, this is such a blessing. So I signed up for that, did that introduction course. You didn't actually come in the end, but Anna Kjellin taught it, and she was fantastic. And I mean, one of the big things I wanted to do it for was because I needed to understand the spiritual energy of where I'm living, because I work a lot with earth places, and I work a lot with, you know, sacred power places that need help, basically. And there's a big Grauhøj burial mound near here called and I'd gone there, and there was this guardian there. He was standing there. He was not happy. And I was like, I think I need to understand more about Scandinavian spiritual stuff before I start trying to have a conversation with this person, or why he's there or whatever. So it was also because I needed something to ground me here. You know, here I am in Denmark. It's very hard to get work. I've applied for jobs. I've never even been offered an interview here. And that is a really common experience for immigrants here. Basically, I'd have to go and take a Danish training. But again, there's a lot of them that I'm barred from because I don't have the right, way to get in. But anyway, I wanted to, how do I live here in this country? And I said, I'm just going to do the introduction course. That's it. And then off I went. And then, it was just amazing. I just didn't expect to love it so much because I've never been interested in the Vikings. I mean, where I live in Roskilde, there's the Vikingaskib Museum. And it's nice. I like it. It's the Viking Ship Museum because it's got this amazing glass window that looks out of the fjord. But I just, all that blood and killing and all that, do you know what I mean? It's like, it's never really been my thing. And then, doing that work with Anna Kjellin, it was like, oh no, there's this whole female other energy thing going on. And then
Old Norse peoples who were Vikings, also just adding that for the historical records, that not Old Norse people were Vikings. That was a small proportion of what was going on. Let me just say that from the teacher's point of view.
Well, yeah, but that's it exactly, isn't it? This is about the perceptions that we have of certain things, because that is how it always gets like presented, because that is what gets the tourists or whatever, and it's like, no, that's not true. That's not it at all. And and then
you ended up on doing a whole 2-year program then.
I did, yeah.
I mean, 1 week became something more involved, right?
Yeah, that's it. It wouldn't leave me alone. Because when I came back from that, people were going, "Wow, you seem so much happier. You're really different. What is it?" And I said, "Oh, I went on a Seidr course."
Yeah, excellent. So the big question then becomes for the topic today. Do you use any spiritual or shamanic practices with your family and with Benji? I mean, how is that going?
So yeah, I was thinking about this, and with Benji, I mean, one thing that was just so amazingly useful. So when he got his initial diagnosis of ADHD, severe ADHD, they are not keen to medicate special needs kids in Denmark, which is great, and I'm really happy about that. But they felt Benji was so severely disabled by his condition that it would help him to have medication, because like I said, even basic things like eating, sleeping, these were things that were sort of beyond his reach. Wow. And also we couldn't cope with him at home. So, but I mean, I'm an alternative therapist. I am not a person who reaches for medication at all. But in this situation, I thought, we would have tried anything, basically. Yeah. So we did try medication. They tried the amphetamine thing first, the Ritalin. He just went crazy on that. So that was 3 days, I think that lasted, that experiment. Then they tried something else. I can't remember which one that was. Began with S, I think. And he took that for a few months. And it did sort of seem to help, but I don't know. But by Christmas, I think he started it in October, and by Christmas, he was really I really felt like he was manic. And I kept saying to the doctors when we had the visits, I'm not sure what's happening, but I think it's his medication. But they weren't listening to me on that occasion. And then one day there was one incident where he was just running around the apartment, and he was so overexcited. I mean, the thing was, it was because it was coming up to Christmas. I thought perhaps it was all of that. And then, because kids get so overexcited at Christmas. And then after Christmas, he was still doing it. And that's when I thought something's really wrong. He ran into the bathroom and hit his head really hard on the sink. And he didn't even miss a beat. He didn't stop. He just kept going. And I was like, something's really wrong. But it was just, I couldn't work out what was happening. So I pulled a rune. Like, come on, went over to my rune bag. Help me. and I pulled out Dargas. And I said to Benji, can I do some rune stuff with you? Now, Benji, he's like, and I think this is like a fairly sort of autistic trait. He's like, I'm the spiritual one. He's a gamer. He's so black and white about anything. Like if I talk about spirits or anything like that, he's like, no, he's not having any of it because like he can't see them. So they're not there. You know, he wants tangible things, but he's like, he will, what's the word? I can't think. He'll allow me to do these things. So I chanted Dargas over him and asked it for its help. And we did all that and I could feel stuff happening. And then we did that. And he just lay there looking at me very bemused. And then about an hour later, it suddenly hit me. He has gone manic. And because all the meetings that we have at school and things like that, they're all in Danish. I have to and my Danish is okay, but when it gets to really complicated, when you're looking at the instructions for medication and things like that, it's in Danish. So I have to look everything up on the internet, but it just means I don't have things to hand. So I went back to the internet and I looked up the side effects for this medication he was on, and mania was a possible side effect. So I stopped his medication. I checked that it wouldn't hurt him if I stopped his medication, because some of them you can't just stop. And I left messages for his doctor to phone up, and I said to her, he's manic. And she didn't believe me because this has been so shocking for me, because obviously as a psychiatric nurse, when I used to tell doctors things, they used to listen to me. Not always, but most of the time my professional opinion was respected, and I'm used to that. And then as a parent,
opinion of a mother, that's terrible, isn't it? You're the one who's living with him. You're the one who really knows.
Yeah, exactly. But on the other hand, I do know my legal rights, and I do know, even though they sound like they're telling you what to do, you don't actually have to listen. So I stopped his medication, and then he did go back to normal. But without that Dargas, it is like Imelda, it was like a veil of fog was lifted from my brain, and I had clarity. It was incredible.
But that is also that, just for people who are not into the rune, so maybe wondering, Dargas is the rune of illumination, of enlightenment, illumination. It's of veil evaporating and so seeing something in its larger kind of truth. So it is rather wonderful that rune Dargas could bring you that moment of clarity about what needed to happen here. And would you mind also telling our audience, I know that our group in Sweden, we have a wonderful group with people who are just waiting to meet in Sweden again and do the second half of our training. But as you were saying earlier, at the moment, none of us can get to Sweden, basically. But I know that our group in Sweden did a ceremony for you and for Benji especially. Are you willing to tell us something about that and what effect that had?
Yeah, I don't know if you just wanted to say a little bit about what the ceremony was that you did.
Well, it was that, I don't know how it came about. You had shared some experiences with Benji, and I've done this in other groups I teach. If there is a member of the group who's struggling with something, I think, well, we have a whole group of powerful practitioners here who by now are already powerful in other disciplines, and now have, clocked up a year of training in Seidr. So what we did is what I think of as a temples of light exercise, where we set a time where everyone, because also our group is intercontinental, it's quite hard to get them all working at the same time. So I was in Sweden at the time, it had to be an evening, so the people in Canada and the US could also do it. So we tried to get as many people as possible all working together. And I remember the instruction being, it was formulated, in discussion with you, that people were given permission to do spiritual work for you, to make your family life better and to do what they could for Benji, with the permission of your family, all at the same time. So we created an energetic temple, holding you and your family. And all of these people did what they were guided to do by spirit, which was individual for all of them. That is my memory of it.
Yeah, and that's it. And because I wrote to the group because this was, I don't know, maybe a year, 2 years ago now. I think
I
think maybe it was last.
February last year, because I was in Sweden for half term. So, and also someone close to me died during that same week. So I think we can hang it up now.
It is a year ago. It just feels like 2 years.
No, I think it's...
Yeah, it is a year ago. It is a year ago.
15 months ago.
Yeah, because Benji, it was last January, Benji started respite care, and he went there once and it all exploded and they threw him out, basically, said they couldn't cope with him. And that's what I wrote to the group, and I just said, we had really hit rock bottom as a family. And I said, I don't know if any of you can say some healing prayers or something, but, we are really just broken right now and it's really hard to sort of go on. And I remember the Imelda offering this ceremony. I was like, yes, please. Oh God. Oh yes, please. And I mean, just the feeling of knowing that people were doing that for us was just so healing in itself, that we mattered to someone and that, we were sort of cared about in that way. I can remember saying, look, I don't want Benji to be cured. I don't think, he's broken and needs fixing, but, just to sort of create that like bubble of support around us would be wonderful. And I can remember it was really, really tangible, the feeling of like being held. And that stayed. So even though, because it's not like things magically got better, but I felt held.
Yeah, and that's a big thing in its own right. And also, because I remember we asked people if they wanted to send you some feedback. And I think what I remember for myself is also, in spiritual work, you can connect with someone, we sometimes call it the higher self, like the self that is outside space and time. And to me, I remember it was very beautiful, like connecting with Benji on that level and seeing the much larger totality of him, not just whatever his behavior is in the moment, but, and also how really he's here on earth with his own like soul purpose. He's here for a reason. He's got his own very unique set of skills and talents, and he's here to make his contribution. And he was an absolutely beautiful and very talented, very intelligent being he is. And I think that it's also just good, it's good for all of us to be witnessed sometimes. That's one of the key principles in, say, psychotherapy or in ceremony, in shamanism, that when something is witnessed and we know that other people has really seen it, that actually changes our own perception of something. I think there is great healing in that. But it also, and I've worked with children in shamanic practice, leaves me with a question of, because we often meet autistic children on that level of, we don't really understand their behavior and it's rather full on in the way they run around. And I think it is sad that we cannot switch on our like second side, because when we see these children with our spiritual eyes, like we see them on the level of soul, we see them, in their totality, and we actually see that they're here for a reason, just like the rest of us are, and the absolutely fantastic contribution that they are going to make, but we as a society need to get to the point where we can allow them to make that contribution, not keep them away from mainstream society the way we sometimes do. So I remember that was like one experience, but that for me really was another reminder of how important it is. And also for me, one of the reasons of doing this interview today, to sort of say, I think we need to start educating people a little that there is more to children on the autistic spectrum than just what we see happening in a shop. There is so much more. And also Benji is fantastic with language. He speaks 2 languages fluently, like maybe better than his mom. I mean, maybe he outdoes you there, going on the way you're talking. That's just showing like how bright taught himself to read and write, like how amazingly talented he is. But of course, in the community of children on the spectrum, we also have children who do not have speech. And I remember once working with a little boy who his mother made an appointment for a shamanic healing session. And also when I accept a shamanic healing appointment, I start like dreaming into it. When the family engages me and I have permission to work, I also open the doors in my dreams. I'm willing to receive dream guidance. So in the days running up to the session with this boy, I had this dream where I saw that the boy had no language, but that music was his language. And actually my cello came. So in the dream, the cello, well, not spoke to me, but like made music. And the cello became the voice of the child. And I realized there is a language this child has. It's just not a language that like everyone uses in everyday reality. And that's the language of tone and sound and music. And I thought, oh, that is so interesting. I really received a clue for this session. But then when the mother and the child arrived for this session, this boy walks into the room where I do my sessions, and he went straight to my cello and he started like plucking the strings. And I thought, wow, I had already seen that in my dream. But yeah, he was not verbal and he wasn't even very vocal. I think he could like grunt, but like he couldn't use speech. But he actually had a language, and that language was music. So that also then meant I could talk to his mother about like, I don't know, about like regular music lessons and, the passing of grades and stuff. But, is he put in situations where he has access to musical instruments with people who know enough about music to understand the language of music? Like maybe there is another language here that needs to be used with them. So, I mean, that's not like Benji's issue, but that's what I've seen. That's just one example of a session with an autistic child. But it's also that, again, rather than just saying, oh, I don't understand this and it's so unfamiliar, I think we just need to sort of work harder to see, where is that channel of communication? And even other autistic children, for them it may not be music, but they may have a very special interest. And if you want to communicate with that child, you're actually going to have to sort of show an interest in whatever that is. You have to find that common ground. But then also when you do that, it's amazing what you find. If you can actually make that effort, you meet these really amazing people who have like a world of their own, and there is a lot of imagination there, and there is such beauty. I mean, they're fully fledged human beings with, they have like all of the, the feelings and the talents that everyone else has. But I think the surroundings just need to work a little bit harder to open that up, and also to give them the opportunity to, to exercise that, to display that, to showcase what they can do. So that's like, again, in my book, National Born Shamans, I've written about this, show it again, and really, trying to give people some sort of ideas like how you might do that. Yeah, well, I think we've talked for almost an hour, so I think we're coming to the close of this, Rachel. And I think I already asked it at the beginning, but like taking everything into account, if you were speaking today to a parent who says, well, I'm listening to this, and in what Rachel describes, I recognize a number of things that my own child does. And I'm like, this is like really difficult. Or maybe even parents who have just received a diagnosis and are like getting a diagnosis. How do you, what guidance would you have for parents navigating that whole journey? Say, so, you've already said that if parents observe these issues, it's really time to, don't stay alone with it, get in touch with professionals and get the child assessed. And we've also said that once a child has a diagnosis, you're entitled to more help. And that can be a very good thing, because life's very hard without that help. But it's still, there's like a whole journey that needs to be made from the point of diagnosis to the point of like, acceptance and finding positive ways forward where you are now. And you've really like also described like the chaos in that, and the mishap, the terrifying accidents that can occur. So for the people who are sort of earlier on in the journey than you are, what would your advice be for them?
Well, I think one thing would be to try and let go the ideas that you have about being a good parent, because we all have ideas culturally from our family or whatever about how we're supposed to parent, and you really have to let go of them when you're parenting a child with special needs, because these things just don't work. But we have so much resistance in us because so much of it is unconscious and imprinted in us. So that would be one thing. And just it's really important to have a lot of self-forgiveness, because I've heard other parents say this as well, and this has certainly been my experience and Thomas's. You feel like you're failing all the time. And you know, I've read a lot about like parents should do this and parents should do that, and if you do this and if you do that, and there's just so much. It all seems to be on you to sort of fix the situation, but you just have to really, really practice a huge amount of self-love and just know that, you know, you're doing your best at the end of the day. And it tends to be really chaotic for people for the first few years, I think, and there is this huge grieving process to go through. I can remember how shocked I was because it was so similar to like when my mum died, and she was the first person I ever knew that had died when I was 26, and just how it hits you physically. And like when we found out about Benji having ADHD, I would be in the supermarket and suddenly be standing there and I couldn't remember why I'd gone in, or and it, you know, it is, you know, really, really give yourself that time to go through that process, because like we weren't offered any emotional support. There wasn't any emotional counselling or anything for us to go to. We really needed it, but it's not something that's provided by the community, and we couldn't afford to pay for it. So, you know, it's like you have to kind of really, really watch over yourself in a way, and care for yourself. And also I would suggest don't go on Facebook and tell people, especially in the early stages. I mentioned it once and learned never to do it again in that way, because I just found it so offensive that people felt they should tell me how to parent my own child without knowing anything. It's just, oh, you should do this. Oh, don't do that. Oh, don't touch medication. Oh, I do this. This is brilliant. Have this. I'll give you this. And it was just, my boundaries were just like, no, no. You know, when you're going through that stuff, you don't need all of other people's put on you. So be really cautious, I would say, about where you present, you know, the information, because you're so vulnerable when you don't really know what's going on at all. You know, you've got to find your own way through it. You don't need everybody else telling you what to do.
Yeah, and also even a child on the spectrum remains a unique individual, and just like with any child, what works brilliant, even in the same family, what works for my first son doesn't work at all with my third son. So, I mean, we can never, you know, over time, when you welcome it, you know, there may be some people you choose to talk to, but you choose them with care, and there will be boundaries around that conversation. It will be in private, not on Facebook. But also, we always have to honor the way where people are different, they're unique individuals, and like you need to find an authentic way of being Benji's parent. You're not the parent of, you know, like other children and other families on Facebook. So you have to do it your way.
Yeah. And then the last thing that I want to say is that, because kind of initially this sort of focus on the parent kind of annoyed me, but I've sort of switched it round now, because I was given this image last week. Someone else was asking me about autism, and I was bringing through, like, I was asking for inspiration, and I brought through this image of like the parent being like the earth or Gaia, and then the child is living within the atmosphere of that planet. So it means that you have to really, really take care of yourself, because if the earth is like putting out toxic fumes, your child is not going to do very well. So, but I love the Gaia image. So like now I'm Gaia, so I have to really, really, really take care of myself and try and be okay. So much of the focus actually needs to be on yourself, if you can find the time to do it. Yeah. And that's where the community has to come in. And, you know, we need to learn how to bring these children into the community, so it's not just the parents that are left dealing with it. Because like me and Thomas, our lives have been, we go to work and then we're carers, and then we go to work and then we're carers. We've not had holidays or time off or anything for years.
You don't get any time off duty. And what I can say is a general comment based on years of shamanic healing practice is also that it goes for any parent and child relationship, but that, you know, your own stress or unresolved feelings will always come into the space, and children are a genius at reflecting that right back. So in a kind of pressure cooker situation, even as a practitioner, it becomes really hard to unpick what is actually the stress that the child is bringing or carrying, and what is the stress that the parent is carrying or bringing, because it becomes so entwined. And then what you will sort of see until the parent, and that's why the parent needs to be given the space. There needs to be respite care and space for the parent to work on their own journey. Because then at some point when you become like Kaya, like when you know what your own state is and where you're coming from, then you can start making decisions about the atmosphere you create where your child is going to be. And that can take some pressure off as well. Because especially, and in my experience, children with autism are often very, very high sensitive, and children will always respond to issues in a parent or issues in a marriage or whatever it is. But I think children on the spectrum, it's almost like they don't have boundaries. For them, it is like amplified. So you can be sure that anything that's, whacking the microphone, you can be sure that anything that's playing with you or going on for you, he will feel it too, but in an amplified way. So there's also an issue there around like boundaries and self-care. So that makes a lot of sense. So do you think you'll ever pull another room with Benji? Or was that a one-off?
I think so. I mean, these things are sort of in my life, so he's not separate from it. I mean, they're all around the place where he lives, and he knows that he's got crystals taped under the bed that are grounding and stuff like this, and he'll talk about nature spirits and elementals and things like that. Don't know why, that seems to be okay. So
Okay. Well, great, Rachel. Thank you very much for sharing your experiences with you. I hope that other families who come up against similar issues will watch this and take some comfort and inspiration away from this, and maybe also a sense of recognition, knowing that you're not alone. This goes on for other people as well.
Yeah.
So thank you very much. Any closing words? And then we're going to be winding it up for today. And what I can do, I can put your own podcast or, any key information you want in the show notes. So you can maybe send me a link and some words, and I can put that in the show notes with the recording.
I think I'd just like to say this is the first time I've talked about this publicly, because since my first experiences of how people reacted, I have been very, very cautious about it. But I just want to say how safe I felt talking to you, Imelda, because I know you've seen that, the vision you gave me of Benji after that ceremony. I was like, she sees, and it was just so life affirming. So, I was really happy that you invited me to do this, because it feels like my next step now, because I think, we need to talk about these things. How can anyone get any better understanding if people aren't talking about it? So, yeah.
Exactly. And I very much feel that autistic children are here for a reason. As a society, we've barely begun unpicking what their unique contribution is. And I think there's more happening now, there's more activism now, and it makes my heart sing to see it. It's just something I feel very passionate about. So thank you for being brave, and thank you for freeing up the time. And maybe we'll talk another time, but thank you very much for today, Rachel. Okay, so saying goodbye to our audience.